To cut a long story short, I had the pleasure of meeting a gentleman who later became a friend, but initially he was a customer. We were both working on the same technology park. A technology park, if you're not aware of this, is a special type of place where people of a similar industry can all work together on projects that they just wouldn't be able to work on alone. And different companies have different types of equipment, and they can work together to do something that they just don't have the equipment. There were companies that would make you bespoke electronic components. They would make the circuit board there and then. They had screen printing facilities, UV boxes, ferric chloride, everything. They could do something from start to finish. Something that 20 years ago was unheard of. And as I say, this gentleman came in and said, I hear you know a little bit about computers, and we are hedging our bets on this wonderful thing called the internet. It was then called the internet superhighway. It's strange at my age to be able to see which words have become outdated and obsolete, to have words go from being the new in buzzword to the old one, in the same way that you hear some of the old phrases your grandparents use. It really does put it into perspective how quickly time goes by. This guy was, financially speaking, in a very good position. He had a very small engineering company that had a very large profit margin. The amount of money these guys can make per hour was absolutely ridiculous, because they could literally pull a figure out of an orifice and the customer would accept it. And their price point was based on how much is the customer prepared to pay, more than how much does it cost us to provide the service. And because the service they were offering was in some cases saving the client millions of dollars, they would pay anything as long as it was half of the amount of money they would have had to have otherwise paid. Things like working on Rolls-Royce engines that would have had to have been scrapped, and you would have spent millions on having things replaced. It makes sense to use this company to do it. And I found it absolutely fascinating. And I think the reason why I liked it so much is because I knew that my grandfather, when he worked at Williams & James, actually did work on Rolls-Royce engines. So hearing this story and seeing what they're doing and actually seeing firsthand with my own eyes the type of thing that my grandfather would talk about him doing at work was absolutely fascinating. And the sad thing is that at the time that I met this guy, my grandfather was still around. It was probably a year before my grandfather passed, and I remembered wanting to see my grandfather and say, "Hey, Granddad, I saw what you were doing." And yeah, you know what it's like. You put things off. Okay, I'll do it tomorrow. And eventually, when my grandfather passed away, I thought, oh my goodness, I never had the opportunity of having that conversation. I never had the opportunity of asking him even more questions. Because the biggest difference between my industry and what my grandfather did, what my father did, and what those before them did, and what I do, is the fact that most of the stuff I do is virtual. What I did 20 years ago that was cutting edge, that I'm immensely proud of, there is no evidence that we actually worked on it. It just doesn't exist anymore. It's become obsolete. Whereas if somebody else was to make a coffee table or a dining table with their own hands, or construct or fabricate something, they can actually say 20 years later, oh, I did that when I was a kid, or oh, I remember doing this, and that stuff is still there. For that reason, my hobby is always about doing something with my hands that will stand the test of time, leaving a mark, leaving a legacy. And back onto the story then. There are two sides to every story. This guy, he had a stroke, and they had an insurance policy. And the insurance policy stipulated that if he had a stroke, it would pay off his mortgage. So that's what happened. Hospital. Oh, you're okay, sir. You'll be fine. Just spend a few days in hospital. And, oh, by the way, your mortgage is paid. Well, okay, I'm embellishing it a little bit, but that's pretty much what happened. And his wife, for whatever reason, was not happy with the relationship. They were now really into the internet in a big way. And things were different in those days. We had chat rooms, and you were just excited to speak to people in a chat room. And the internet was not open to everybody yet. You got to remember that in these days, computers were exceptionally expensive. They were thousands of dollars or thousands of pounds where I'm from. You wouldn't actually have one unless it was for one of two reasons. Number one, you needed a computer for your job. And considering I studied computer programming and I always knew that I would have something to do with computers, and the fact that I used it for business, I used it with an accounting package called Sage Line 50. I even remember what it was called. The internet revolution had begun, and it was taken up more by companies initially because most companies had a computer. And then there were some people who had a computer at home, and I got into the internet with CompuServe. And yes, you would get into these chat rooms, hi, how are you? And you would speak to strangers, and there'd be these big group chats. And everybody in these chat rooms were ridiculously well-to-do or working for huge companies. I remember this one time when I was particularly young, was speaking to someone, and I got invited to a very prestigious party in London. Now, would you have done that to a stranger in the street? Oh, that's nice. Hey, do you want to come to this really prestigious corporate event? No, you wouldn't. Would you do that now? It's like, no, you wouldn't. But back then, nobody knew what they were doing. And that's pretty much what happened to his wife. His wife was invited to go shooting in America. And she went. When she came back, she said to her husband, hey, I think we should be living in America. Our business would do really, really well out there. And I think we should buy a house. And I think we should do our part of the business that we're going to make an absolute fortune. But in order to be able to get more customers, we really need to be there. We need to show them what we can do. And we really need to open a facility there. And she said, I found this house and the kids are going to love it. So they remortgaged the house that had just been paid off. And that was quite easy to do because their business does make a really good profit. And she took the kids, she bought the house with the money that they'd got from mortgaging the current house. And they're still quite young. He hasn't reached his 50th birthday yet at this point. And so they got the mortgage, they got the money, she bought the house, but she bought it in her name. And she said, oh, by the way, I've left you. The kids are going to school here. I've got a gun. Don't bother coming round or I'll shoot you. I was like, ah, can you imagine? And I was hearing this. I felt really sorry for him. And I thought, what a complete bitch. How could you do this to your husband who literally paid off the mortgage? It's him and your brother-in-law who married you and your sister. They've been working for your dad for goodness knows how many years. Your dad treated them like brothers. That's why he was so happy that they married you, his two daughters. And he entrusted the business to them, and the well-being of his kids, that's how much he adored them. And what have you done? You've just kicked him in the teeth. You've basically buggered off. You've left him holding not the baby, but the business. And he has to work for that business to pay off the mortgage so that he can have a house. And you've left home and dry. And I thought, this is one of the worst stories I've ever seen. He asked me to help him find a solicitor, which I did. And I heard the story and I felt really bad. And I was really, really shocked. And I think the biggest reason why I was shocked so much was for the simple reason that I knew her. And I thought, this really doesn't sound like her. Anyway, this one day, she contacted me. I, of course, wasn't that pleased to hear from her. I was like, hello. What do you want? She explained that he's quite lazy. She explained certain things about him. And I thought, yeah. To cut a long story short, she said, I'm worried about him. I'm worried he might have gone back to his old ways. And here's a key. She said, I've got a key for you here. And he's not there at the moment. He's in hospital having something done for angina. I actually forgot he had angina. The reason why I know he had angina and remembered angina is my wife has recently been diagnosed with angina. And when she said it, I knew what it was instinctively because I'd already heard about what it was from back in the day, 20 years ago. And it's like, oh, I know what that is. She said, whilst he's there, could you go and have a look at the house and see if it is normal or has he turned it into a shithole? And I thought that was quite strongly worded. But I accepted it because she did use quite strong language. Very, very amusing, very down to earth. She could have an entire room in fits of laughter for no reason. You'd be laughing with her and you don't even know what she's laughing at. Very, very funny person. I took what she said with a pinch of salt and I said, actually, do you know what? The mother-in-law has recently sent me this Sony Handycam and I've been playing with it recently and I've got quite used to it. Why don't I take the camera with me? So not only can I tell you what I see, I can show you. I was all excited and I took this camera with me. That was the first camera that really got me into videography. That's how I ended up knowing everything I do. Photography was different. I never really associated, and this is ridiculous now, isn't it? I never really associated photography with videography. I never thought of videography as just photography on steroids, which is how I think of it now. Now I've got to grips with shutter speed and frame rate and how they relate to each other and how all stuff to do with ISO and aperture, color balancing and lighting and audio and all of that stuff. Now I've got that to grips. I really do relate the two together. And that was thanks to this video camera. But because those video cameras were so different to point and shoot still photography, I think that's the reason why I thought of them completely differently. So I took the Handycam, I went there and she was right. This place was an absolute shithole. If you've ever seen any of those TV programs about the hoarder, where there was absolutely crap everywhere, the inside of the house literally looks like a rubbish dump and it stinks. That's pretty much what this guy turned the house into. And I'm walking around and I'm finding it a little bit funny at first. And as I'm slowly seeing more and more stuff in that house that just shouldn't be there, the more serious it got, the more empathy I had, the more sadness I was starting to feel. I felt really, really bad for the guy. What the fuck must happen in your life to make you not give a shit so much that you can live like that? That's what was going through my mind. I remember thinking to myself, she must have really fucked his head up for this guy to be able to live like this. But as I later found out from speaking to her, no, this is what he was like. Something must have happened in the Ukraine, which is where he was from. He was an orphan. He thought he was an orphan for years. It was only years later he found out he had a father. But something must have happened so much and fucked things up so much that this was normal. Shocking, but true. So I sent her the video and she said, yeah, I thought so. He's pretty much fucking everything up. And one of the things that he was explaining to the solicitor was how she's not giving him any money and he's unable to pay the mortgage. He's now literally working for the company for free. He doesn't know what to do. And when I was explaining that to him, she said, well, absolute bollocks. She said, the money is in his account and I keep sending him messages. Have you paid the mortgage? Have you paid the mortgage? Have you paid the mortgage? And literally having to play wife like she was doing when they were together. But this time, because she's thousands of miles away, he can actually ignore her. This is the biggest difference. And so I went to see him and I said, look, what is it that you really want? What's happening? What's going on? And it turns out that he was just really fucked off with his life. He doesn't really want to work in the engineering business every day, knowing his kids are not there, knowing his wife is not there. He really feels like he's been left with paying the bills. He's not happy with that. So he doesn't want to work there anymore, knowing that the lion's share are going to his wife for actively doing nothing. He felt like he was doing all the work. And he didn't really want to pay for the mortgage for this house. He just wanted the money. Get rid of the house. So he wasn't paying the mortgage in the hope that basically it would be foreclosed on and the house will be gone. And the government, if you know anything about the UK, if you're unable to work, which now the guy's had a heart attack, he's now in hospital with angina, he is going to be able to get signed off and he's going to be able to get money from the government and he's going to be able to get a free apartment and be able to live the rest of his days knowing that the business, if they replace him with someone else, is going to be giving him a certain percentage of dividends. And so that's what he was doing. He was keeping his eyes shut, waiting for everything to turn to shit, and everything would be fine. And I said, well, why don't we do this in a way where you're in a little bit more control? Why don't we tidy up the house? Why don't we put the fucking house on the market? Why don't we sell it? There might even be some profit in it for you, but at least you'll be in control. And then you can decide what to do as to whether you want to get a little flat, whether you want to try and get support from the government. Let's do this properly. So anyway, we started doing that. I owed the guy a little bit of money from he helped me out with something. And so I took that money and I used it to pay for a cleaner, an industrial commercial grade cleaner to come in and basically clean the place from top to bottom. But something else happened. He then started to come against me. And he was saying to his solicitor, and I know this because I had to do something for his solicitor, it was the one I recommended. He was telling everyone, not only was it the fact that his wife wasn't giving him money, which he was saying that I owed him money and I wasn't giving it back. It's like, hello? Technically you owe me money right now because I've spent a lot more money to get your shit together in the house and I was expecting you to give me back. But now understanding that this guy manipulates reality to make people feel sorry for him and to get what he wants, I could see that this was not working. There was oil in the ointment. So yeah, this is basically what I'm saying. There are two sides to every story, and you've really got to be careful who you invite into your life. And once you start to see there is a certain amount of drama, get rid of them. That's when you need to start seriously getting rid of dead wood. If you want to know more about getting rid of dead wood, here's a link to another video. Well, I hope you found that of interest. Thank you for listening.